All right, in this section, we're going to be discussing upgrading. If you're a traditional SharePoint or you've actually had some experience with it and you've got an install, you're probably not going to do a greenfield SharePoint install, but you're going to actually want to bring your content over and put it into your new SharePoint 2013 server farm. So this section is going to be a little bit more talking than demos, but we're going to work through and show you some of the things to be looking at and where to go get some additional information. Just remember that SharePoint upgrading is about the same type of project as a new install. You just have to look at a little bit of different pieces. If you've already gone through the worksheets that we talked about in the first sections, then you should have most of the information that we're going to be talking about here. There's just going to be some processes about getting that data from your old server into your newly installed SharePoint farm. So what we're going to be looking at is upgrading changes. Again, if you're a veteran of 27 to 2010, you'll kind of know how things have worked, or possibly a 2003 to 2007, this may be a little bit more familiar to you, but we'll kind of discuss how that has gone through. We'll discuss what your planning needs to be for putting the process into place. We'll discuss SharePoint 2007 upgrade, which maybe a lot of you are looking at, depending upon the way the SharePoint lifecycle installs work if you're doing an upgrade. We'll discuss the SharePoint 2010 upgrade, and those are in a particular order, and we'll discuss that. So the upgrade changes. Upgrading from 2007 to 2010 had many options. If you'll remember, you had some in place, you had move and replace, you had a bunch of different options about how to do that. So a lot of planning was in place about which direction to go as you're going to do. Upgrading from 2010 to 2013 has fewer. The process was significantly simplified. As a matter of fact, it's so simplified that you pretty much have a specific path to get from 2010 to 2013. And we're going to discuss kind of how that works as you're going forward. The upgrade paths require more resources for 2013 due to the removal of the in-place upgrade option. This is very interesting because the upgrade option was very popular. It was able to take the production environment from one SharePoint environment and put it in, and just put 2013 on top of it. Because of the significant changes in the infrastructure that happened between 2010 and 2013, that path is no longer supported. What you are actually going to have to do is do a database disconnect and reconnect to bring in your old content from SharePoint 2010 to 2013. In the planning, you're going to need to do a lot more planning because of those changes. You need to know where your database locations are and where each site is in each of those databases, because how you put those sites into databases means how you're going to have to batch up that upgrade. Because you're moving over databases and doing the conversion in that direction, anything that's in the same database is going to be upgraded or actually moved over to the new farm, at least together. This is going to make a big difference in how you actually figure out which one of your user sites go where, and how you're going to actually organize when those pieces come into play. The nice thing about this, though, is that SharePoint 2013 does allow SharePoint 2010, I say previous, but specifically 2010 functionality, to continue to operate on the new servers. This means that even though you may move the configuration or the content database over to the new farm, you can keep the site looking like 2010 until you're ready to move it up and make sure your users are ready for all of the new functionality. Still, you're going to be running on the new infrastructure. You're going to have some of the new capabilities in there, but you can actually let your users not be too startled when you move it over. And once you get those databases onto the new server, you can batch up the different sites in that database and move them onto the new look and feel and the new SharePoint feel at that point. Now, if you're on SharePoint 2007 and you're looking to upgrade to SharePoint 2013, I've got to let you know that 2007 to 2013 direct upgrade is not supported. This is because there is such a difference moving from 2007 to 2013 that there were too many different scenarios. There were too many different ones of those paths. Like we mentioned, that you had a lot of different options for doing upgrades from 2007 to 2010, and then adding that on to moving to 2013 was not going to work with the budget and the resources available. Content must be upgraded to SharePoint 2010 as an intermediate stage to get to 2013 if you're coming from 2007. That being said, that's fairly well-known conversion. So if you're doing that upgrade, you're kind of going along a well-tried and true path. So you're not going to be too alone there. You're going to have a lot of information available to you on the TechNet site to be able to help you make that happen. That being said, I'm particularly talking about content there. If you're looking at custom development, if you're looking at custom web parts or all the rest, you're looking at 2-generation change. So generally what you're going to do is you're going to pull that out and just pull that functionality out through the SharePoint 2010 upgrade and just put that custom code directly into 2013. Because the content's going to come over, you're going to be in good shape with the state management as it goes through, but you're probably not going to have your dev team upgrade to 2010 and then move it to 2013 unless you're kind of going into a legacy mode at that point. Your 2010 items may be supported, but you're probably going to want to take advantage of some of the additional updates and have your dev team move straight from 2007 to 2013. Full review of the SharePoint 2007 to 2010 upgrade process is highly recommended. I'm not going to go into that here because we're kind of talking about 2013. The process is very well documented on TechNet. There's a number of books specifically on this, so I recommend you go through that and really kind of know how to get from 2007 to 2010. And at that point, we'll kind of talk about how you get from 2010 into 2013. So not trying to leave you hanging, but there's plenty of information out there. There's a previous class on SharePoint 2010 administration here, so that can give you some deeper information as well. It's just a fairly involved process that I'll leave you to take a look at that. For the 2010 upgrade, what we're going to look at there is clean up your 2010 sites. Make sure your logs and your reporting are running error-free. You don't want to start this with anything that's still a little bit iffy or maybe throwing errors. And clean up your recycle bins and anything, any old versions, trim any versioning that you can, just to be able to make sure that you're pulling in as little data as possible. You want to pull everything over, but SharePoint sites with old sites that may need to be archived, old items that don't need to be pulled over, historical data, you may just want to have to archive those out of your databases to minimize the actual production systems you're doing. If you need to reference them, bring them over. This is a good time to do spring cleaning on your SharePoint sites and make sure that just things that are needed are being used and that you're bringing those over in a very controlled manner. Build up your SharePoint 2013 test production farm. To be honest with you, you'll need to do some tests, as I mentioned in the setups and all the previous planning. But what you're probably going to end up doing, if you're like most organizations, is that test environment is going to end up being your production hardware because it's probably going to be newer. It's probably going to be more efficient hardware. So start it as your test. You're going to want to run through the process and make sure that everything's in good shape and they're not going to be surprised. But be prepared to actually take that migration test, the upgrade test farm, and move it over and use that as your production. What will happen generally is that after you archive everything off of your current production environment, you'll probably have that as your backup test environment. You've already got the hardware. You're going to need 2 sets for doing the migration. Now's a good time to do that justification to your boss that we really need this keep this old hardware as our test environment if you're wanting to do tests on physical hardware, or if it's still fairly good hardware, set it up with Hyper-V and set up some virtual systems for your devs so you can be in good shape for that. You can actually run those all those steady state production testing before it hits into your production farm. Back up your existing content databases and set them to read-only. This is just for when you're ready to do that move over. Because of what you're looking at here, you may want to take your content databases and move them over 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, depending upon the sizes and how it works inside your organization. But once you back that content database up, 2010 lets you let the database as read-only. This is really nice because it lets you know that you've still got your old system running and you're in good shape, but that you do know that no changes are going to the old system while you're moving that data over into the new one. Now, if you're doing your testing, if you're making sure that you can actually go through and the process works well, let your users keep running. But when you're ready to do that upgrade and now we're going into the production farm, don't forget to set that content database to read-only. Otherwise, you're going to have somebody come in and go, all my stuff's missing, or you didn't back up my changes or whatever, and you'll find that they actually somehow managed to hit the old server, especially if you're moving content databases over one at a time, and now you're going to have a situation where you've got new content in both places, and we really don't like that to happen. So, take those content databases, restore the databases to the 2013 database server. Again, if you've done this attach upgrade in 2007 to 2010, this should be familiar. If you haven't, it's a fairly simple process. You put that into your database, you make sure everything's in place and everything's good to go, maybe over weekend, maybe overnight, depending on the size of your databases. And then you connect each database to the SharePoint server farm. When we go through the configuration, I'll show you how to connect each of the new databases into the server farm. What happens is SharePoint will take a look at the content database. It'll know what's going on. It's got some tables in there that let it know the version of SharePoint, let it know how everything's set up inside the database. And then you'll move through there, and it will actually upgrade the content. It'll actually take the database itself, make sure everything's working with the new SharePoint server. That being said, you're still in a situation where that content can be run in SharePoint 2013 in 2010 mode. So you're going to be kind of in this situation where on the back end you're going to get some benefit from the updates and the modifications that have been done, but your users are still going to see their SharePoint 2010 content. When you go through there, review the results. Make sure that everything came through. SharePoint's going to let you know if you run into any problems, that if you've got a situation where maybe there's some custom logic in there, there's some custom data types that were compatible with 2013, you're going to need to know about that. It's fairly rare for that to happen, especially if you've got commercial add-ons that are in 2007 or 2010. But a lot of times if there's internal development that maybe it was put together fairly quickly or maybe did not have a lot of experience with SharePoint, you may run into situations where the content upgrade does not succeed, and you'll need to go back and check and see what's going on with that, what the developers have done. Maybe they've accessed the database directly rather than going through the API. Maybe there's some other things that have ended up with that database in a situation where the upgrade process doesn't work with it very well. Again, not very likely, but make sure and go and do that. Don't just connect it in and assume everything's going to be fine. Go back and review it. Make sure you're in good shape. Go in at that point, create the web applications for each content database. When we looked at the install worksheets, you remember we actually took the URLs for each web application and showed which content database it was connected to. This is a great time to kind of go back to that and see what you've got. This will allow you to see, make sure that the URLs stay the same, that you're actually in good places, or at least the paths stay the same. At this point, you may be going on a different IP address. You may be going on a different web server or farm name as you do the migration, but the paths themselves you want to stay the same, because once you get everything fully turned over, you can redirect the old DNS names over to your new server, and everything should work fine, and at that point users won't really see a lot of difference. But just know that getting that in place and putting those in the same location will be really helpful. Then at that point, when you've got everything going, you've actually seen what's happening with the web applications, you know your sites are in good shape, go back and upgrade the databases themselves. This gets you some additional performance increases. This actually optimizes the databases a little bit. It sets things up so that as the databases grow, they're optimized for 2013. This isn't done until you tell it to, because as you go through, you want to make sure everything's in place. You want the content to be consistent, but then once you've gone in, made sure that everything came over well and that the upgrades are right and the web applications are good in place, now you can get that optimization that you want to have happen. And once you've done that, you've got everything going. Note that if you've got the previous templates that are not in SharePoint 2010, you won't lose them. SharePoint 2013 understands 2010 templates and will still run them. That being said, you're not going to be in a supported state, which means if you call support, they're going to have you move those templates over into 2013 templates, which is something you probably want to do anyway as soon as you can to let your users have the benefit of the new advances in asynchronous user interface and some of the other capabilities. But until you get around to that, you're still in good shape. There's nothing that's going to stop you from getting into production. Customizations are going to need to be tested against the new server. This is where I was mentioning the trial migration go through. Those customizations may be something as simple as doing multiple cross-list connections. It may be something as detailed as custom applications underneath SharePoint that access the database or access the lists. It may be something such as a web part that does the single sign-on that you need to make sure and test against your new security credentials. All of those kind of pieces go into place. Again, it helps to be very methodical as you're going through testing, as you're putting everything in place, and make sure that everything's working in there. There's nothing worse than coming through, getting everything in place, doing all your testing, releasing it to your customers, and then being told, oh, but you didn't find this, or you never came over into this, and our workflows aren't happy. So go through there. It helps to have those site owners come through and test the upgrades as well. What you probably want to do is make sure that you've got your migration time. Again, no in-place upgrades as before. The migration time means that all of those sites in the same content database need to be moved over, which means you're probably going to have a pretty big content database to move. Scheduling migration time means maybe you have to do it over weekend. Maybe you have to find a long weekend to do it. We've had to do those before. But knowing how all of those come into place. For telling you that, I would recommend that you view the SharePoint 2010 to 2013 upgrade as a special case of the installation. So go into, when you're going through your process and your planning and all of that, what we started our modules with, put in that upgrade piece, put in that now that we've got the SharePoint system up and running and we've got all our customizations in, now migrate over the old systems and whatever we've got and what those content databases over into your 2013 content databases, and know that you're going to need another cycle of that. Do the QA check, do the testing, do the development, come through and do the evaluation of what happened and what changed between the 2007 or 2010 object models or APIs or all of those kind of things or databases, and move them over into the 2013. So know that you're going to need to do a fair amount of planning on the upgrade even after you've got those servers up and running. So again, there's a lot of documentation on the TechNet site for getting it moved over, but in short, mostly it's a lot of work and not a lot of new capabilities or new things that you have to look at. When you're getting those processes in place, you're going to find them very, very similar to the installing the SharePoint from scratch. It's just know that you've got to, instead of testing for third-party applications or for your custom-developed applications, it's going to be testing against that content as well that a fresh install does not have. So that's why this module is where it is. So you've got all of your executable code, you've got your templates, you've got your style sheets in the install, and in the upgrade, you're actually doing the upgrade of the content in the database itself, the workflows, where they are in the process, all of those kind of things.